This next question deals with a really difficult topic. What about those who face torture at the hands of, say, someone like ISIS or some other government like the North Korean government, which is, or the Afghanistan government or Pakistan government, Iran, Iraq, Egypt, places where the church has faced enormous persecution because of their faith. Seen it in the Sudan and Darfur. Individuals who have been pressed to the task of either renouncing their faith or dying, and have been even tortured because of their faith. And the warning from Jesus is to never deny him. If you deny me before men, I will deny you before the Father. If you confess me before men, I will confess you before the Father. And that kind of verse creates a ton of fear for individuals, and rightly so, because they face this unbelievable torture. And then if they renounce their faith, I tell you where I think it got played out in the most difficult situation is in the early church. In Egypt, especially around 300, the pressure was for pastors to hand over their scripture and renounce their faith or watch their children killed in front of them. Some of those pastors handed over the scripture because they desired to save their children and their wife. Some of them literally moved their families out and just said, y'all go somewhere else. I don't want you here. If I have to die because of my faith, that's one thing. I can't take the fact that you guys would die for this. So what do we do with this? Well, several things. First of all, is there are times in Scripture where individuals have, at the hands of murderous, crazed dictators, used a little bit of deception to save the lives of innocents. We see this in Moses and the babies. Remember that in Exodus, where infants, the midwives lied to the Pharaoh about being able to get there in time, and it says God blessed them with children, and so there was a blessing on them. We see this a little bit in there's a few other examples of this. Esther uses a little bit of deception and a little bit of her own maneuvering to get Mordecai, through the help of Mordecai, to get Haman trapped in his own evil. We see this a little bit in, there's a few other examples like that in the Scripture. And so because of that, we have to deal with, okay, well, where do we draw the line here? We have a murderous dictator, that kind of thing. I would say that the general rule is we should maintain our faith no matter what. We should never renounce our faith. We should always say, yes, Jesus is my Lord, even at the threat of violence. If someone, after enormous torture, gives in, should we say, well, they're damned eternally? I would say no, but the early church dealt with this a lot. After the persecution of the church would subside, those who had renounced their faith came back to the church. Many times the church would put them through enormous steps and before they would let them back into full membership, but eventually would receive them back into full membership. It created actually some tension in the early church because of this. They'd say, well, your pastor renounced his faith and then ordained this other pastor. So they in Africa during this time period, if you were ordained by one of these traditors, that's what they were called, traitors, your ordination wasn't valid, and it created a huge disunity among the African churches. There were those who said, no, the faithfulness of the pastor has nothing to do with the person they ordain. There were others who said, no, it really does, and those aren't authentic churches. And the question on all this, how do we deal with this? The answer is Simon Peter denied Jesus Christ in the single most critical moment in human history, and Jesus restored him. And so because of that, I would say it's not the unpardonable sin. It is to say if someone has a habit of continually denying Jesus Christ because of convenience, that's probably a mark of whether they authentically belong to him or not. If someone stumbles like Simon Peter, we have the promise of Jesus where Jesus says, Satan has asked to sift you like wheat, but I have prayed for you so that after you have fallen, you would be restored to the brethren. I think that is a really good verse for us to deal with in this case. If someone is tortured by ISIS and then they say enough to get themselves out of trouble and released, does this mean they're eternally condemned? Only if it means Simon Peter is eternally condemned. So I would say there's grace and balance there. I think Jesus' warning is primarily about, out of just pure convenience or pleasure, we're just constantly denying our association with him, that would put us in light of that. There may not be a real relationship with him. But to say with a broad brush, any person under extreme duress and torture, whoever renounced their faith is eternally damned, I think is inconsistent based on Simon Peter's own testimony in that regard. So, good question. It's a hard one because our brothers and sisters all over the world face this every single day. And so that's why I would say I think God's grace is sufficient to cover us even in our weaknesses. And I think for that we're all very thankful. Good question. See you guys this week.